And it is working. Okay, so at least it says it's working. We'll trust the technology until I hear otherwise. Hope everybody is doing well. One of my favorite activities doing when I was young was to go to the Del Mar Fair. The Del Mar Fair was the San Diego County Fair. And Del Mar is a very nice place in San Diego County. And I'm guessing that all of you here have at one point or another been to a county fair? No. Never. It's worth it for the experience to go at least once, right? Because it's got something for everyone and something to annoy everyone. But the part that was always fun when we went to the fair, well, lots of parts were fun, but one part that was always weird was you would go into the demonstration area. Right, and the demonstration area is where they had the Ginsu knives. You guys remember Ginsu, right? And they would have all the special things for cleaning your windows inside and out simultaneously. They had a special magnet. You would be able to wipe on the inside and outside at the same. Because how else are you going to wipe the outside of your window, right? You're going to second story. What are you going to do? And the guys were these carnival barkers. You know, they had their microphones on, and they would be given their sales pitch and all their demonstrations. You take it home, and it wouldn't work at all the way they had, but it looked good, and it was very, very impressive. But the last time I went to one of the fairs, they don't really have those anymore. They don't really have those anymore because now we have as seen on TV.
Oh,
right?
no.
Everything is as seen on TV, right? Or even worse now on the internet. But the idea is that it's the infomercials that do that job. You don't need to have one guy in every county fair trying to sell your steak knives. You can get one guy once in a studio with perfect lighting, perfect demonstrations, and everything else, and then you just make an infomercial and you run that 1,000 times in 1,000 different cities and wait for the money to roll in. So now everything is as seen on TV, except a lot of things I see now in stores have a little label. As seen on TV.
There's a whole section at Target.
It's a whole section at Target.
There's a whole section at family stores.
But the things that advertise on TV are being sold at Target?
As seen on TV, the
As
whole
seen-
section.
Yeah.
So the question I have, though, is why isn't this on every product? Right? Why don't you see a Toyota with a sticker on it that says "as seen on TV"? Because I've seen Toyotas on TV.
Yeah.
If you buy a beer, why doesn't it say "as seen on TV"? Because they advertise beer all the time.
Well,
There's a special type. There's a special type of product that is as seen on TV. Wouldn't you say? Right? You don't just see Gucci as seen on TV. Well, maybe I watch other channels, but the question is, how would you categorize the type of products that are going to be getting the as seen on TV label?
Useless tchotchkes.
Useless tchotchkes. Okay.
Well, they market it as seen on TV as a bargain.
Okay, so sometimes it's a bargain issue, right? It's the 1995 3 easy payments of $24.50, right? The COD, they definitely seems to be it's a bargainy kind of thing. But ultimately, the bargain is going to be when I look at the price tag. What is as seen on TV telling me when I'm in that aisle in Target?
Does that mean that you know how to use it because you've seen it on TV, that they demonstrate it?
That there's a demonstration that maybe this is an item that if I didn't see it on TV, I wouldn't know, first of all, what to do with it, and I maybe wouldn't know that I wanted it, right? If it's something like, a back scratcher for your chinchilla, I'm not sure when I see the packaging what I'm supposed to do with this, right? If it's some sort of special slicer for vegetables, if I haven't actually seen someone demonstrating it, I'm not sure that I'm not going to be able to use it without cutting my finger off. So the as seen as TV usually is for something that is not self-explanatory or that is already in the public consciousness as an item. It is for something that is totally new and that you're going to need to be brought up to speed because it's not just a handbag or pants or a belt or a car. This is something that it's not just special, it is new.
It's new.
Right? It's totally different and unique than anything else you've ever seen. Unless you saw it on TV. Right. So the as seen on TV is a very special label that tells you that this is something that you probably would never have thought of on your own. And that label is going to be really, really important for our Torah portion.
seen it on TV.
Well, we're gonna have to replace the TV part, obviously.
See where this is
Um, But in Parashat Terumah, we are going on a shopping spree,
Oh,
kind of
that's
shopping
right.
and building.
Make
Right.
this, make
Right.
that.
This is the God's shopping list, God's wish list
Oh,
for building the Mishkan, for building the tabernacle. But God isn't just saying, "Bring me lots of stuff." He's telling us what to build with it.
What to bring.
yeah.
Well, what to bring, but also what to build with the
Yeah.
things that will be
Right.
brought. So we're going to go ahead and jump into this list of construction
Materials.
details. And we're going to pop into chapter 25, verse 17. And we're on page 488 in the eighth kind.
Verse 17.
Verse 17. So we're in the midst of talking about the Ark of the Covenant, of Raiders of the Ark fame. And we've already covered the basic construction of the box. And now we're talking about what else goes on it.
You shall make a cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide.
All right, let's make sure we got that right. 2.5 by 1.5, right? 2.5 cubits by 1.5. I get that right? And 1.5 cubits wide. Yeah. Remember how long a cubit is?
18 inches.
About 18 inches. Officially, it's the tip of your finger to your elbow. That was the way they would measure when they were measuring things. But when it was standardized, it's about 18 inches. So all you have to do is multiply it by 1.5, and you can work out how many feet something is on average. There's a debate about exactly how many inches, meters, or whatever, but 18 inches seems to give us a pretty good rough estimate of what a cubit was.
We built one.
We built an ark. Yes, yeah. I remember back in camp.
Yeah.
All right. So this is an ark. We did not make it out of pure gold. I don't believe we even made it out of acacia wood. 'Cause I don't think acacia wood was in
We
abundant
followed
supply.
the instructions.
But we did follow the sizing and overall decoration kind of things. But following the instructions is going to be the big question. Because remember, this is what the Israelites are having to make. So these instructions are going to tell them to make something that God wants. And what do we know from the next Torah portion? What happens if you make something that God doesn't want as part of your worship? Death, right? Between the golden calf, which gets made, and people say, "This is God, we're going to worship this," and that leads to a lot of problem. Or when we have Nadav and Avihu bringing the strange fire in the inauguration of the tabernacle, and they also die, you want to follow instructions, right? Because these instructions appear to be very, very specific, not just, make it, it'll be nice, whatever you come up with is good. God is not giving us a lot of latitude. It seems to be quite precise. Okay, so we've got 2.5 by 1.5.
Make 2 cherubim of gold. Make them of hammered work at the 2 ends of the cover. Make 1 cherub at one end, the other cherub at the other end. Of one piece with the cover, you shall make the cherubim at its 2 ends.
Right, so it's all this sculpted, molded gold. Molded is not the right word. It hammered so that it comes up, so that it's all one sheet of gold that has these angels coming out of it. And I remember that the cherubim are not fat little babies with wings. That is a later artistic license that was taken in Europe. These would have been at least something a more terrifying aspect human, or perhaps even more like animalistic type creatures. When we look at cherubim and other ancient Near Eastern cultures, they often look more lion-like or just generally dragon-y kind
And
of.
they have wings.
And they've got wings, right? And that's kind of the big point here is we've got these wings coming off of them. Okay, so yeah, don't think of cherubim as being the people that bring Valentine's gifts.
No.
These were meant to be intimidating, not meant to be jolly. It's not Baby Yoda. Okay.
The cherubim shall have their wings spread out above, shielding the cover with their wings. They shall confront each other, the faces of the cherubim being turned toward the cover. Place the cover on top of the ark after depositing inside the ark the pact that I will give you. There I will meet with you, and I will impart to you from above the cover, from between the 2 cherubim that are on top of the ark of the pact, all that I will command you concerning the Israelite people.
All right, so we're going to have this cover, and there's going to be angel 1, angel 2, and somehow their wings are going to be, covering the cover, whether that's in the middle, whether that's actually taking up the whole. You can go online and find 1,000 different artists' interpretations of what exactly those cherubim would have looked
They're
like.
looking down.
Well, they're definitely looking downward,
Yeah.
but the question of exactly what does that mean? Was that their wings like this? Were their wings like this? Were the head like this? The head like that? That is a little unclear from just this text. And that unclarity is something that we should begin to be wondering about, because after all, we got some specificity. We know we got 2 cherubim. We know exactly the dimensions of this, and we've had other dimensions for other things. But there's still a bit of information missing if we were going to try and make this. If I were to give you this set of instructions and a hammer and gold and the skill to do it, do you think you would all come up with exactly the same
No.
looking thing
No.
at the end of the day?
What's it look like?
What's it look like, right? Now, that may just be that a cherub, one of these cherubs, was widely known. Everybody knew what it looked like. That everybody knew what it looked like, and so no one would need additional information. But for us, we don't know exactly what these look like because our concept of them have been diluted by centuries of other artistic interpretations, perhaps. But let's see if we can handle something a little bit simpler. Let's try a table. All right, first, woodworking 101. We're going to build a table.
That should be easy. You shall make a table of acacia wood, 2 cubits long, 1 cubit wide, and 1.5 cubits high.
Okay.
Overlay it with pure gold and make a gold molding around it. Make a rim of a hand's breadth around it and make a gold molding for its rim round about.
Everyone with us so far?
What?
Make
Make a gold molding.
Okay, so we're making a table.
Sounds like IKEA.
Let's insert Allen wrench into screw number 47, right? So you're making a table, right? Think of this being like a little side table,
Okay.
right? You're making a table because it's only, as you saw, it's only 2 cubits long, which is about 3 feet. So you got a table like that,
And it's only 8
right?
inches
It's a
high.
nightstand, maybe a coffee table sized. This is not your dining room table. What's that?
And then what type of border? There's different.
Well, and then there's some sort of rim that goes around the top
And
of
is
it.
it rounded? Is it slanted? Is it?
What's the degree of the miter? You know,
Right.
what are you doing here? Is there, is the molding? You know, is it Baroque? Is it Rococo? Is this Gothic? It's still a little unclear, right? Does it have clawed feet? Is it clawed and ball? It's all the different things that antique people go on and on about. We've got a table, which is why, by the way, you usually see this depicted as just being like 4 straight legs. Like they don't go any more complicated than that. But let's see, maybe there's some more detail we'll get here.
So after you make the gold molding for its rim round about, then make 4 gold rings for it and attach the rings to the 4 corners at its 4 legs. The rings shall be next to the rim as holders for the poles to carry the table. Make the poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. By these, the table shall be carried. Make its bowls, ladles, jars, and jugs with which to offer libations. Make them of pure gold. And on the table, you shall set the bread of display to be before me always.
All right, so this lechem panim, this bread of display, would go on this table. And the table, as you can see, is going to have 4 rings that the poles could be slipped into, and that's what you're going to use to carry the table around. Vaguely clear, right? I mean, we've got some good dimensions going on here. We've got at least an idea of the size, and maybe there were enough conventions of what table making would look like that most people would be able to come up with a table that fits this description if you lived 3,000 years ago.
It's very close to table height today.
Yeah.
It'd be about 28 inches.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yes, I hadn't actually done that math, but yeah, it's about where our tables would be now. It's not a giant table, and it's not a little.
Coffee table.
Yes.
Breakfast table.
Exactly. It's just it's a little table, and you're gonna,
And the rim around was to keep everything
On it.
on it.
well, presumably, it's having a rim on a table that's going to be moved, and a table that
Right.
has lots of implements. You don't want things rolling off the edges.
Right.
Um,
It
so
reminds me of a tray that you could take off
Yes,
You know, the
exactly.
trays with the rims
Yeah,
on
right.
stuff.
Except this tray had the legs
Had the
built
legs
all
on
the
it.
way down. Exactly. So rather than being something you put on a table, it's the tray and table have been blended together.
Okay, so you have the Ark of the Covenants being carried by rings and
Yep.
poles, and this table is carried by rings and poles.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Now we're going to make what is perhaps the most famous of the things that most people knew about long after they had forgotten about the Ark of the Covenant, right? Until Indiana Jones came along. If you asked the average person what was the Ark like, they would immediately think of Noah.
Right.
No one thought of the Ark of the Covenant until Steven Spielberg decided to put it up on the screen. So we did still remember, however, and don't even get me started on whether people remember the table for the lechem panim, for the showbread. But this next thing,
Is
everybody has remembered for always. And indeed, if you go back in archaeology, you will find the next symbol found in all of the mosaics of the ancient world, inscribed onto coins, even done as graffiti around the ancient world. So apparently this next thing was a big deal. So pay attention to how we'll build it.
You shall make a lampstand of pure gold. The lampstand shall be made of hammered work. Its base and its shaft, its cups, calyxes, and petals shall all be of one piece.
And yes, those are
Um,
botanical terms. So we're going to be talking about building something that has certain floral motifs.
right.
6 branches shall issue from its sides. 3 branches from one side of the lampstand and 3 branches from the other side of the lampstand.
All right, so what are we building here? What do we now call this?
menorah.
The menorah, right? Now, recognize the word menorah just means lamp. It doesn't only mean this menorah. You can use the word menorah to mean any lamp. But this menorah, of course, captures special place in the Jewish heart and in Jewish iconography. So we've got a menorah that's got 6 branches coming out, 3 from each side. And then, we'll carry on.
On one branch there shall be 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with calyx and petals. And on the next branch there shall be 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with calyx and petals. And so for all 6 branches issuing from the lampstand. And on the lampstand itself there shall be 4 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with calyx and petals, a calyx of one piece with it under a pair of branches, and a calyx of one piece with it under the second pair of branches, and a calyx of one piece with it under the last pair of branches, and so for all 6 branches issuing from the lampstand.
All right, everyone got that?
Yeah.
So basically what that last little bit is trying to tell us is that let's see if I can do this in my best imitation of the ancient drawing style, is that you're going to have a little lump between each of the branches that has the sort of shape of like the base of a blossom before the next branch forks out into each one. And then there are going to be other things as well on these that go up to their cups and the oil. So if you know what these things look like, you've got a rough idea of what that overall structure is going to look like. We're following the basic concept here.
Yeah, I'm just,
Anyone want to try and build one yet?
I'm trying to figure out how to do that.
How you make this out of one solid piece of hammered gold?
Yeah,
Takes a lot of work.
without a laser pointer.
Yeah.
Their calyxes and their stems shall be of one piece with it, and the whole of it is of a single hammered piece of pure gold. Make its 7 lamps. The lamps shall be so mounted as to give the light on its front side, and its tongues and fire pans of pure gold.
All right, so we'll pause real quick. What does it mean to have light on the front side? Well, we're used to the idea of candles, right? Sticking up. They didn't use candles. All right, what did they burn with? Oil. All right, so if you have oil, think about having a little bowl, a cup that has the oil in it. Do you just drop a wick on the top of that and then burn it?
Yeah.
Nope, not if you're doing it right. If you do it right, there needs to be a spot where the wick comes out, where the wick hangs. If you've ever seen any of the old pottery examples from Israel, this was the standard shape of a lamp for a couple thousand years, where you basically had a pot with a little gap with like a pinch. It almost looked like if you were, your kid brought home the ashtray they used to have them make in preschool, except they only put one little bend for one like cigarette, They don't make them anymore. And that's where you would hang your wick. So the main part of the wick would go into the oil, and then it would wick out the oil to the burning part, and that's where your light would come. But that means that you want all of those little divots pointing the same way. They're not pointing like in opposite random directions. They're all lined up to face towards the inner side of where it's going to be projecting light. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So don't think of this as being perfectly symmetrical bowls at the top. These are designed to make sure the light is pointed inward together. Good.
And it shall be made with all these furnishings out of a talent of pure gold. Note well and follow the patterns for them that are being shown you on the mountain.
Okay, as seen on
TV.
the mountain,
As seen on TV.
as seen on Mount Sinai, right? So there seems to be a bit of a problem here, though. How big is what?
Oh, how big?
The dimensions. Thank you.
No dimensions.
How big is the menorah? Right? Is it like this?
It's like,
Right? Is it 20 foot tall?
Doesn't say.
How? I mean, we have a certain upper limit because we know how tall the Mishkan is going to be, and you don't want to set it on fire.
And it shall be made from 1 talent to the whole, which is what, kilograms?
Oh no, it's
Oh,
talents are much more than
Talent
that.
is
Oh, really?
bigger.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 It
But
was like 8 feet or something like that.
says who?
Ancient talent.
How do you
How
know?
do you know? It doesn't
I
say.
remember it someplace reading.
You heard someplace. Someone once said
Yeah, someone said.
it was.
Actually, if
it
you
was
go
taught.
to the Wilshire Boulevard Temple,
They have the original.
they have the original. Wilshire Boulevard
Someone once
Temple
told me.
has replicas, which of course was famous because it's Warner Brothers and Fox and
Mhm.
everyone else belonged to that shul.
They were good at prop
But
making.
they're the actual size
They think.
of what they think.
And you
was
can
the
go
actual
and in
size.
Israel, there's a place called the Temple Institute, which
Yeah.
is advocating for the rebuilding of the temple quite strongly. And they also have built replicas, or actually what they believe will be the things that will be used once the temple is restored. And
Reassuring.
they're making their best estimate, but we don't actually know exactly how big it is. Now, we don't know how big it is. You know, that gives us a little pause and we can sit and have a little chat and I can joke about us seen on TV, us seen on the mountain. If you're Moses, it's a bigger problem,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's like when the European Space Agency was sending that probe to Mars, and one side thought that it was metric and the other side thought it was imperial, and it turned out that it just burnt up in the atmosphere because they had forgotten to do the conversion, right? If I say I want this to be built and I want it to be 1 unit high, and you show up with this, and I say, what's that? It's like, no, that's not a model. I want the full version, right? But if you come in bringing something that's 8 foot tall, but I really wanted something 2 foot, you can see the problem here. There's no dimensions for the menorah. And then we get this very interesting, as seen on the mountain phrase at the end.
Yeah.
How did Moses know what to make? Did Moses know what to make, or was he just using his imagination? Well, the commentaries, of course, weigh in. So this is what we're going to take a look at. We're going to start with Rashbam, which is Rashi's grandson, and that's our first part of the page. Everyone got it? All right.
So the phrase that you are being shown on the mountain, God had literally shown Moses a visual likeness of the tabernacle while Moses had been on Mount Sinai. This must be contrasted with such expressions as appear in Genesis, appeared to him, where the image Abraham received was one which originated within him rather than external.
Okay, so what's Rashbam grappling with in the first half of this commentary? What's he trying to solve for us? The problem that he's trying to
Who was
resolve?
shown? He was being shown on the mountain. Moses was shown.
Moses was shown, and
we didn't all see it.
right, and why would he be shown?
Right.
Because without being shown one of these, you wouldn't know how to make it.
No, you wouldn't.
Right? He is recognizing, as do the other commentaries, that these instructions, even though they seem like they take up a lot of pages, are not sufficient in and of themselves to get the job done. Right? If you send this in an email to a contractor, good
Yeah.
luck getting back what you thought it was going to look like. And when it's something that God has been very specific about, there must have been more information. Lo and behold, our last phrase, as you will be shown on the mountain, Rashbam says, that's God's out. God is saying, here are the general parameters, but don't worry, you're going to get the full version when you come up on the mountain. It will be shown to you. And then he's contrasting that with the phrase "as it appeared to him," which is taken from the story of Abraham, because he wants to make a difference between this is what it seemed to be like for Abraham, which doesn't necessarily mean it is exactly what God was trying to do, as opposed to this. In this, we need to have confidence that this is exactly as it was shown, that it's not just somebody with the cheap Chinese knockoff. This is the real version of what God wanted. So grammatically, that's what Rashbam is trying to play with here. Yes.
I find it curious that all of these specifics about how it's to be constructed give you a really good picture of what it looks like. It's just how big it is that seems to be at issue.
Do you know exactly what a calyx is? And could you, if you drew a calyx and you drew a calyx and you drew a calyx, do you think you'd all draw the same one, even if you all knew what it was?
Well, I'd go look at an almond flower.
Okay.
If I could find one. You know.
Well,
And
But
how
yeah,
big in proportion?
Yeah. How big in proportion?
Right? Is
I
the
think
calyx
that's
this big?
doable
Or is
by
it
a
this big?
fraction. Salo could figure that out.
Oh, could figure a solution out.
Yeah.
But the question is, would he figure out the solution?
No.
That is what the commentaries are wrestling with. Exactly. Is there a number of possible solutions, of interpretations of this, that any craftsman that made them would be in the ballpark and that would be good enough? Or was there a singular vision for how this all looked and fit together, and any deviation from that was inappropriate? The commentators seem to be feeling that there was only one way to do this. Now, it's not just that they're being pedantic. They are also trying to inoculate against a tendency. Because if you thought that it was up to the interpretation of the person making it, then I could make one, right? And mine would be just as good as Bezalel's.
Yes.
If it doesn't really matter precisely how they look, but anything close enough is good enough, then that means we could get busy trying to build new ones right now, which indeed, like I said, the Temple Institute has tried to do. But for many, many thousands of years, people have resisted doing that. Right? You have not seen a big push to, well, let's just build another Ark of the Covenant, right? And then eventually we'll need it. Or let's just build a Mishkan, and eventually we can use it, right? Maybe we can't use it now because of the limits on whether we can do sacrifices or not. We can't. But let's build all the pieces, and then when we need it, we'll need it. This is saying you can only build the pieces if you were shown the pieces, and you weren't shown because you're not Moses, and you didn't even live at a time to see the ones that Moses had built based on what he had seen. So basically, the chain of interpretation of exactly what these must have looked like is broken.
So you're saying those at the Temple Institute are wrong?
I'm saying there's no way to know they're right. I mean, they might be right. I can't say they're wrong because I don't know what's right, but neither do they. They can't say they're right either. They are beautiful approximations of what it might be like. But to claim that that is what it is simply impossible according to most Jewish commentary. All right, let's move on and see how others have tried to wrestle with this question of how did Moses at least make this, even if we can't?
Okay, the phrase is, shall the candelabrum be made? This passive form used here is in contradistinction to the active forms of made used throughout the section. It's in connection with the making of the vessels. This indicates that it shall be made of itself automatically.
What?
The passive form is used to make it of itself because Moses was puzzled by it, the work of the candlestick. And the Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, cast the talent of gold into fire, and it will be made of itself.
Okay, so
And that's why it doesn't say here, you shall make.
Right. It shall be made. Right. So what they're playing on here is the passive versus active voice. Now, English does this as well. Right. If I'm working in an office and I say, the executive will write the report by Thursday, then who's making the report? The executive. And if I say the donuts will be ordered for the meeting, who's ordering the donuts?
The secretary.
We don't know. Are the donuts just going to magically appear? Right? If you want donuts for your meeting, you better designate someone to buy the donuts. You can't just say there should be donuts, right? They will be ordered. That's a passive form of the grammar in English. and is often used to avoid responsibility as well as to, somehow the report wasn't finished on time. You mean the executive didn't finish the report, right? We play with this in English all the time, and that's what the Rashi, based off the Midrash, is honing in on. He's saying, look, it's a weird passive form of it will be made. There's this weird yud floating extra in the word, and that means it was so impossible to make that what God basically said was, you know what, fine, you can't handle it, chuck the gold in the fire and I'll take care of it. And it'll come out auto-magically, to use Steve Jobs' famous phrase. All right, I'll do a miracle for you because apparently you're too confused by what this is going to look like.
This actually sounds like indication of Aaron, because Aaron's defense was he threw the gold into a fire.
And
Here came the calf.
And here came the calf. That's exactly Aaron also, and Aaron also used that by basing it off his passive voice in that phrase, right? Again, and boom, it was made, like as if no one made it, and therefore he's blaming God as though it was a miracle that the thing came out. And so of course we worshipped it because it's impressive, and that is exactly the same play on the language that they are attuning themselves to. But that's not exactly completely clear by itself. So Siftei Chachamim, as they do, or as he does, is commenting on Rashi's interpretation.
Until God showed him a menorah made of fire. Here it is implied that Moshe made the menorah. You might ask, did not Rashi earlier explain that be made means it was made by itself?
All right, so Rashi goes on to try and explain that Moses got a vision of what it would look like, on the mountain, as seen on the mountain line. And in that vision, he saw the menorah as though it was made out of fire, and that was his template that he would then be expected to use. But now Rashi seems to have contradicted himself. If Moses saw an image of a burning menorah so he knew what it would look like, why would God have to make the menorah by just doing a miracle in the fire pit? Seems like a contradiction.
But even when God showed him the menorah, as it stated, it did not help, and it was made by itself, as Rashi explained in the other paragraph.
Yeah, he did see one, and it wasn't enough. Right? Again, if I were to hold up a picture of a menorah for you and then say, make this, you might still have difficulty. And apparently that's what the commentary is honing in on, is that it seems to have been this idea that it was shown an image, and yet it was still made on its own. And that seems to indicate that this is a tricky piece of hardware to get right. All right, Siftei Chachamim are giving a second opinion as well.
God saw that Moshe had difficulty. Therefore, God showed him a menorah of fire. But Moshe still had difficulty. So God said, throw the mass into the fire. This was done by Bezalel. Thus, in actuality, the menorah was made by itself, although God never expressly told Moshe that it would be made by itself.
All right, so the contradiction they're trying to resolve in this text is, but did God tell him to do that? Exactly? That it would be made by itself? Because it also says that God told him to make it.
Right.
So God told him to make it. Then God said it will be made. And then God said it will be by the vision that you'll see, on the mountain. This all seems to be a bit of a jumble of who's making what. And your solution of, well, it just popped out of the fire by itself, that's nice. But even if God did tell him to put the gold in the fire, God didn't necessarily tell him that this would be the way that it was made. It seems as though God was struggling, trying to get Moses and the other Israelites to make what God wanted, and then only really in an act of almost frustration at the end, went ahead and made it for them. But there seems to have been a much longer distress of trying to get this created that didn't quite work, that the humans, we just were just not quite getting it. And eventually God did it, but that wasn't God's either original intention or even necessarily his instructions to Moses. We see how that's what the commentary is trying to say?
Yeah. Do these same issues pertain to the cover of the ark, or is this just about the menorah?
So why is it the menorah that's getting this description? And it has to do with this weird extra yud in the verb for it was made, whereas the other ones don't seem to have that. Now, we are going to see when we get to the Talmud in two more texts that there were other things that Moses was also confused about. And so that is something that we will add on to. So you're asking the right question. But the short answer at the moment is only the menorah has this unusual phrasing. All right, so let's go ahead and read Chizkuni on the same topic, and before we get to our Talmud piece.
It shall be made of hammered work, it said. According to Rashi, the reason why the word "it shall be made" here is spelled with an extra letter yud in the middle was in response to difficulties that Moses had in understanding how Bezalel would be able to comply with the detailed instructions concerning the candlestick. What puzzled him most of all was that, as opposed to all the other furnishings, he had not been given a measurement for the height of this candlestick.
Right, so as we talked about, Michael pointed out, we didn't get a dimension, right? We know how many cubits for the ark, we know how many cubits for the table, we know how many cubits for the whole tabernacle. We do not know how many cubits high or wide or deep was the menorah. And so therefore, that's even more of an indication of why the menorah in particular would need this special remedy as opposed to all the other furnishings.
So what does that letter yud mean?
Well, it means that it's spelt differently than all the others, and that's why it gets interpreted to be part of the passive into the passive verse, or passive voice, excuse me. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at how the Talmud talks about, in general, some of the difficulty here.
It is taught in a Baraita. Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says, an ark of fire and a table of fire and a candelabrum of fire descended from the heavens, and Moses saw their format and fashioned the vessels of the tabernacle in their likeness. As it is stated, after the commandment to fashion these items, and see that you make them after their pattern, which is being shown to you in the mount.
Okay, so there will be this image that you're going to get, and that's what you're going to make it. So Rabbi Yossi is basically using the simplest explanation, which is, as seen on the mountain, so shall you make. And he's sort of going off the idea that there wasn't any magical menorah popping out of the furnace. He believes that, yes, Moses did need to see what these things look like, because these instructions, even the one with a bit more detail, are insufficient in and of themselves. And therefore, there had to be a full appreciation of what he's referring to as the pattern, the tavnit, which is the word we get in our final verse 40. It is verse 40, right? Yeah, verse 40, of the image of what they are. We're going to come back to that idea of tavnit in a little bit, though. All right, but he's not the only voice in the Talmud. There is another rabbi that has a different way of understanding this.
The school of Rabbi Yishmael taught 3 matters were difficult for Moses to comprehend precisely until the Holy One, blessed be he, showed them to Moses with the Holy One's finger. And these are the 3 matters: the form of the candelabrum, the exact size of the new moon, and the impure creeping animals.
All right, so let's make sure we understand those 3 topics before we see our proof texts. All right, the candelabrum, that's the menorah, right? Fancy word because translators like to show off their vocabulary. The shape of the new moon, well, as we have just passed into Rosh Chodesh Adar, right? Rosh Chodesh Adar, Rosh Chodesh of any month, the new month begins when you first get a sliver of new moon, right? You go dark in the moon during the phases, and then there's a tiny little bit. Well, exactly what counts as being the new moon and that tiny little bit. That is something that God had to tell Moses. See that? That's what I mean when I say new moon, right? It looks like that, because how else do you describe it, right? Some things are only describable by pointing, right? So the menorah is something that had to be pointed to. The new moon is something that had to be pointed to. And the sherets, the creepy crawlies of the world that are not kosher, right? And that can cause impurity. God also had to say, see all these things? Impure. And give a visual demonstration of them. Otherwise, trying to describe the verbal anatomy of every possible sherets, of every possible these creepy category would be impossible. All right, so we're getting some proof texts.
So the way he showed him the new moon and the creeping animal, that's how the candelabrum was shown to him, because it's written, and this is the work of the candelabrum.
And then keep going.
The new moon was shown to him, as it is written, this month shall be for you the beginning of months.
Right. This month, right? This, it's a demonstrative this. Right? If I say this, I'm pointing to something. Right? That's a verbal pointing word.
The creeping animals were shown to him, because it says, as it is written, and these are they which are unclean for you among the swarm of
Which
things.
is the plural of this, right? This and these.
And there are those who say that God also showed Moses the halachot of slaughtering, as it is stated, now this is that which you should sacrifice upon the altar. And slaughtering is the first ritual of sacrifice.
Right? You don't get to sacrifice until you've actually done shchita, until you've done slaughter, because we don't throw living animals on the altar. And again, it never tells us in any explicit diagrammatical words how to do shchita. Right? You can read the entire Torah. You will never find a precise description of where the knife goes, how the knife moves, and how slaughter takes place. So since God seems to indicate that there is a particular way to do the sacrifice, there must be a way to do the slaughter. And since we don't get that listed, it must have been shown. Just like we didn't get enough information to know how to build these on their own, so too, we didn't get enough information for slaughter in the text itself alone. Therefore, there must have been the companion experience, the multimedia CD at the back of the book that gave the visual side of how this would actually take place. Make sense? And it is absolutely true for any activity. Any of you who have ever tried to learn a skill that is more complicated than just, click here, click there, know that a diagram here, an illustration of even middling quality, or an actual person pointing to an actual thing and saying, this is what a pine tree looks like, is a lot more helpful than just a very, very long text description of a pine tree. What do we say? A picture's worth 1,000 words. And sometimes even 1,000 words wouldn't cut it. All right, onward. Now we're going to get to Rambam, the Guide for the Perplexed, because he wants to make sure we understand why this word tavnit was being used.
It might be thought that the Hebrew words temunah and tavnit have one and the same meaning, but this is not the case.
All right, so temunah can usually be translated as being like the form or image of something. And tavnit can usually be translated as being the form or shape of something. But he's trying to point out that these are not the same word. Yes, in casual conversation, they might be able to sort of be used interchangeably, kinda, but theologically, there's a big difference.
Tavnit, derived from the word bana, he built, signifies the build and construction of a thing, that is to say, its figure, whether square, round, triangular, or of any other shape. For example,
what we would say, the blueprints in modern English. Right? This is because it's a building word, it's something from which you could build from. And therefore, that the word tavnit is what's used in our verse 40 is precisely because God was giving Moses blueprints. He was giving him an actual pattern to follow.
For example, the pattern, tavnit, of the tabernacle and the pattern tavnit of all its vessels, which was in Exodus in verse 9, according to the pattern tavnit, which you were shown upon the mountain.
Which is the verse we read.
That's the verse we read. The form of any bird.
Which again, the word form there is the tavnit form.
And form tavnit of a hand.
In Ezekiel.
And the pattern tavnit of the porch.
From Chronicles, right? So consistently, this is used for very physical, this is what one looks like kind of situations. Something that you could then say, it has this shape and this color and that form. Onward.
And right, in all of these quotations, it is the shape which is referred to. Therefore, the Hebrew language never employs the word tavnit in speaking of the qualities of God Almighty.
Right, so sometimes we do use the term temunah. We do use the word of implying of an image or an appearance of something when talking about God. Very famously in Ki Tisa, there's going to be this appearance of an image of God when the elders and Moses go close to the mountain, Mount Sinai. But what Rambam wants to make sure we understand is that was a temunah, that was not a tavnit. That was an appearance of, not a form of. And that may sound like a very fiddly distinction, but it's critical.
An artist concept versus a blueprint. You can't build from an artist concept.
Exactly right. And the artist concept in this particular case may not have even had a single line on the page, right? It was something that gave the impression of the appearance of God. It didn't necessarily have a single line, shape, color, form, or anything else. It was an experience that gave the impression of God's presence, not necessarily a shape which gave the impression of God's appearance. And that's why the word tavnit is not used when talking about God. That the Torah is consistent, even more than you might have ever imagined, inconsistent in trying to make sure we do not accidentally think God has a shape. Despite all of the phrases like finger of God, hand of God, and moving and all of those other things, the Torah is very, very clear when it comes to words that would unmistakably say that God had a shape, that it doesn't use them when talking about God, because it does not want us to think that God has a shape, right? No form, no structure, no blueprints. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. But there's another reason. We're going to go now from the rational to the mystical, from Kedushat Levi. Another reason why this whole experience of knowing how to build this might have been hard.
Rashi explains these words as referring to the fact that God, while Moses was on the mountain, had to give him a visual lesson in how the menorah would look when completed, as Moses had difficulty in constructing for himself a mental image of it. Why did Rashi feel that he had to give this exegesis when he did not do so when the Torah described other parts of the tabernacle to be constructed, also accompanied by the instruction in accordance with all that I show you?
Right. Why did Rashi comment here is basically what he's trying to say.
Furthermore, the entire premise that Moses would have had difficulty making a mental picture of what the complete menorah would look like is difficult to understand.
All right. So this is something that we sort of had our own difficulty agreeing on, of whether is it really that hard to figure out what this might have looked like? If I know what an almond blossom looks like, if I know how big a talent of gold is, can't I, expect that reasonable people with a reasonably shared culture and understanding of imagery and the nature around them would be able to more or less handle this? Why could Moses really not put together a mental image? I mean, and if it was not right, couldn't have God simply said, no, a little more to the left? I mean, it seems like there's more going on here than just Moses couldn't follow instructions without a picture. At least that's Kedushat Levi's opinion.
In order to understand this, it seems that we must realize that when the various creatures or phenomena that constitute the various parts of God's universe
That means us.
look at their creator and the brilliance that is beyond their ability to endure, they are so filled with awe that they have completely excluded any other feeling, attribute, and that they are capable of under normal circumstances.
All right, so basically, when you look at God that directly, when you contemplate God that deeply, your brain doesn't work anymore. And God's trying to give you instructions about one calyx here, one calyx there. It's just, I know God is saying things, but I can't even begin to put together an image in my head of what that is, because God is basically filling my head and pushing out any other ability to construct something else out of those words. And help?
Yeah.
I'm going to need some help, God, because I cannot begin to structure in my own imagination anything when I am overawed by this experience of you. All right, that's a problem.
It is only when the Creator draws around himself, around his essence, the veils that enables his creatures to look at him without being harmed, that they can once more consciously experience such feelings as joy and any of the other attributes.
All right, so what he's saying here is a very Kabbalistic concept, which is that God has to basically dial it down. Right? God has to veil himself from the world, because without that veil, the only experience we could have would be awe.
Right.
And that would be crippling. And God wants more from us than just adoration. He's got angels for that, right? God wants us to be able to live in the world, but that means God, by necessity, has to pull the curtain closed so that, yes, God's presence radiates through the veil, but not full force. And once that awe can be turned down because we're not exposed to the overwhelming experience, then all of the other experiences and attributes and feelings that we have can begin to resurface again, like simcha, like joy, or any other expression. Make sense? So, why was it hard for Moses to make this?
He forgot out some of the details.
He forgot everything, right? It's just that level of exposure is overwhelming. And the idea that these are just simple instructions for how a Bronze Age community put together their little tent of worship is missing a lot of the depth of what's going on here. This is not just a construction manual. This is not just blueprints. This is their record of their encounter with the divine and all of the overwhelming experience that goes with that, and how they were then instructed to make it concrete or bronzecrete in their world, and to take what they had seen on the mountain and turn it into something physical in a way that would represent that going forward. Because remember, the Mishkan is basically going to be a mobile Mount Sinai. This is giving them the opportunity to continue the experience of that intimate relationship they had with God when God shown himself in the metaphorical sense at the expression of the Ten Commandments in Parashat Yitro. They are now going to carry that with them. They're taking the mountain with them. They have seen the demonstration, and now they're taking it home. And that ultimately is what the Torah is all about. And how they did this is more than just insert, slot A into tab B, or tab A into slot B. Questions? Comments? Okay, then we're good for the
I
day.
have a comment.
Oh, yes.
Okay, go right ahead.
When you